What's up, everybody, and welcome to another Native American Heritage Month conversation. If you are just now tuning in and you've missed all of the other ones that I've had this month, make sure that you go over to youtube.com/borderline entertainment and watch those. But I have a terrific guest today. I've got Mariah Gladstone with IndigiKitchen here, and we're going to be talking about all things Indigenous food. You have no offense to Witchy, no offense to Frank, but this is like the one conversation I've been so excited. Like I've been like counting down the days that we get to, because food is a big part of my life. I love eating. I especially love the food of my culture, and I'm excited to share that information with you. A couple of housekeeping items. Please don't forget that we need to be respectful in the chat and the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. Again, thank you to those who go and watch that video. And then also, please make sure that you support your local Indigenous communities. If you don't know whose land you're on, go find that out and make sure that you donate to a land back cause. And I think that's just about it in my notes. Yeah, that's it. So without further ado, let me bring in our guest. Mariah, how are you?
Okay, I'm great.
Well, I'm so excited. Like I said, I wanted to save that introduction for you to hear it live, hoping that it would might just like light a fire so you can ready to just like run with it. Because I seriously am so excited. Um, for the folks who didn't watch my Indigenous Peoples Day showcase last year, who didn't get to see your cooking demonstrations, or people who might not know who you are, period, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, nisto na tanan ko umah case the wakaki, nopachtutu sitsikitsi tapik sakum. Hello, my name is Walking Raven Woman for government purposes. My name is Mariah Gladstone, so you are obviously welcome to call me Mariah. I am Blackfeet from Montana, but I'm also enrolled Cherokee in Oklahoma with ties to the blood reserve in present day Alberta. I've got family there, but no status. So um, that's who I am.
So tell us a little bit about growing up. That's one thing that we've done in each of these conversations, and I've talked about myself growing up Indigenous, what it was like for me. What was it like for you growing up Indigenous?
Yeah, I would say that I was really fortunate to grow up in a household where both my parents are mixed, and therefore I was lucky that as a mixed kid, I got that experience of having two parents that really understood that as well.
Yeah.
However, I grew up off the reservation. I actually grew up about 2.5 hours away from the Blackfeet Reservation. And
Hmm.
so while I spent summers there, a lot of my experience within the schooling system was very much in predominantly non-native schools,
Yeah.
in a community that didn't necessarily understand what it meant to be Indigenous. My mom actually just told a story the other day about how when I got to my preschool holiday play or something, and I didn't know the story of the manger and like all of this stuff, and I came home and I was like, Mom, everyone knows this and I don't know this. And she's like, that's just not what we talk about. But she's like, you know, lots of Napi stories, like our trickster. And
Yeah.
so, and, there were things that I was really lucky that I got to experience. You know, I grew up on wild rice and wild game meat and had a garden out front and grew up picking endless raspberries and making fry bread with my grandma and doing all of these things. Um, and in a community where not everyone did that,
Hmm.
you can look at that as different or you can look at that as incredibly lucky. And so I definitely think of those things as incredibly lucky.
I yes, incredibly jealous is what I would say. Before we get into cooking, we get into food. Let's just expand, Mariah, a little bit more. What are some of your hobbies, some of your interests? What kinds of things what are you into?
Yeah. So I'm an engineer by academic training.
Wow.
Um, so I love building things, working with my hands, crafting. But I'm also uh, I don't know if I'd call myself an athlete, but I'm an aerialist. So I do circus tricks. I um, teach aerial silks and hoop, and I'm really lucky to perform with an aerial troupe. So
That's cool.
I get to do that, which is a great outlet for stress and just for artistic creativity as well. Um, and then I'm lucky I have my garden, I have ducks, and I love kayaking and skiing and just generally being outside. In Montana, if you don't like going outside in Montana, it would probably be a very boring place.
Yeah.
But for those of us that get to go outside, it's full of endless adventure.
And how many ducks do you have? I've never met anybody that has ducks.
11, 11
11?
ducks. Yes.
And is it like, I'm not gonna get too hung up on this, but is it like ducks walking in and out of your home, or is it like, hey, there's a family of ducks that live like really close by and I just kind of take care of them and they're friendly with me, or is this like
So the duck
collars and
adventure
names?
the duck adventure started because one of the dogs kidnapped a duck egg from a local mallard nest, and then I was yelling at the dog and I was like, now you look, you've killed this duck egg, this is very bad. And then it hatched, so then
Whoa.
I had a duck. And then I ordered more ducks because ducks can't be alone, they'll get lonely anyway.
Right.
There's been a series of fluctuations within the duck numbers, unfortunately, due to a black bear family. um,
Okay.
I'm not going to get into that,
Yeah.
but there's an electric fence, and the dogs have learned to protect their duck brethren. And
Wow.
the ducks live in an actual duck coop, which is undergoing upgrades to make it even more bear secure.
Yeah.
Yes, the
That's
bears will go to sleep soon. But
unreal.
anyway, yes. So the ducks do live in their own duck enclosure, and they're way more cold tolerant than chickens. They just
Mm-hmm.
hang out and sleep on the snow and tuck their little feet up and
Oh my
dip in
gosh.
the ice bath in the middle of winter. They're fascinating. The high the other
Yeah.
day was like -3 degrees, and they were just playing outside because ducks are
Wow.
weird.
Listen, that I was living vicariously through you so much. We've got deer that come over at night and sleep in my side yard, and then a Cooper's hawk that likes to swoop down and just kind of like perch on my fence all day. And then of course I've got cats and a dog, and that's about it. So my home experience with other animals is very limited. So this is very exciting. I love that. Thank you for sharing. But let's get into obviously the topic at hand, food. And I know that the first question I want to ask is, why is food such an important part of Indigenous culture? But before we like get into that conversation, I want to share with you and then of and anyone else that's in the chat. So, I live in Columbus, Ohio, right? And around here, we have a lot of different restaurants, a lot of different cultures represented. But we only have in the entire state, we have one native restaurant, and it's a food truck. And I know for me and for the other indigenous people in the area, like it's so huge. It's always like when it's food truck season, we're looking at their schedule because it's the only place aside from our home that we can like get other food. So at least like from somebody who's so far removed, because like our reservation is in like New Mexico. So I'm very far away from my people. So that food truck it's like home every time that I'm there. Like it feels so impactful, and even if I don't know who's cooking that day, like they feel like my family because like we get it. So understanding that, and I don't know where I was going with that. I just wanted to kind of like share the perspective for mainly the viewers of like, hey, like food is a big deal to me, not just because it's delicious, but because it makes me feel connected and welcome and loved and everything like that. But as somebody who works in the culinary industry, representing our people, can you kind of blow that up and expand on it? Like, why is food such an important part of our culture?
Yeah. So I initially got involved within this food sovereignty movement, this desire to help Native communities feed ourselves again, because I saw the epidemic of diet-related illnesses within
Mm.
Indian country, especially diabetes and heart disease and obesity and malnutrition, all these things that our communities are dealing with. Along the way, I've realized that there are way, way more benefits to reconnecting with our indigenous food systems. Um, I also see so much of the history of why we're at this point where we're trying to revitalize native foods.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because those foods have been very intentionally taken away from our communities in an effort to control us.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quote from the 1850 Commissioner of Indian Affairs report, which writes, "It is cheaper in the end to feed the whole flock for a year than to fight them for a week." Essentially saying, let's destroy native people's ability to feed themselves,
Mm-hmm.
force them to depend on rations so that they won't fight back against us, right?
Yeah.
There's the saying, like, don't bite the hand that feeds you. That's literally what the US government was trying to do to Native people.
Mm-hmm.
It's why they started just wiping bison off the map.
Yeah.
It's why George Washington burnt the Haudenosaunee fields in the Northeast. It's why nobody told anyone downstream of the dams on the Colorado River that they were going to put dams in. And then suddenly the water was turned off, and that irrigation that everyone downstream had relied on was gone.
Yeah.
There's really, really intentional stuff that was done so that Native people wouldn't be able to feed our communities, even though we've been doing it sustainably for thousands of years. And so I think that, we look at the impacts of that. Congress passed laws, of course, that said that Indian agents could withhold rations from families that did not send their kids to boarding school.
Right.
Like, you had to choose between sending your kids off to these horrible places of forced assimilation, violence, trauma, potential death,
Yeah.
or starvation. In one winter, when the rations didn't come, a quarter of the Blackfeet population starved to death.
Oh my
And then in
gosh.
the years that followed, our leaders made decisions to sell some of our remaining reservation lands so that we would have the money to buy food so that our children would be able to survive.
Yeah.
And part of those lands include the eastern half of what's now known as Glacier National Park.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
land was sold so that I could be here, including our sacred, Chief Mountain. And that is not just something that identifies the inherent value that our leaders and our ancestors, but placed on our presence today, but also that comes with a huge responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Because that happened because we could no longer feed ourselves. And so what I see today is Native people working to reclaim that, not just the foods themselves, but the knowledge around the foods.
Right.
And I think that so much, we talk about, like, what are native foods, and we can talk wild rice and corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, chiles, black walnuts, hickory, beaked hazelnuts, pecans, all the berries that we have: huckleberries, raspberries, thimbleberries, service berries, wild strawberries, blueberries. Shoot, there's 14 different types of berries
So
that
many.
I have in Montana alone. I was like, there's salmon berries and elderberries and more berries spread all across Turtle Island. But Ocean Spray on their website says that cranberries are one of 3 fruits indigenous to North America. This is why I got in a Twitter fight with Ocean Spray.
You did?
I did.
How did that pan out?
They said that they would update it to say that it is one of 3 fruits that is grown commercially in North America.
Okay.
I still disagree with them, but I decided to call a temporary truce.
Yeah.
Because it's Ocean Spray. But all of that is to say that those are just foods. None of that tells us where those foods came from. It doesn't tell us how to prepare them, how to identify them, what time of the year we harvest them, how many can we safely harvest. Elderberries are phenomenal. They're delicious, but you don't eat them raw because their seeds contain cyanide in them. Kind of like apple seeds, right?
Right.
But to cook with elderberries, you dry them, or you boil them, or you dry them and then you boil them.
Hmm.
And then you can juice them, you can make elderberry syrup, and I made elderberry barbecue sauce by mixing elderberry juice with tomato sauce and chili powder, right?
What?
Like there's lots of things that you can do, but it's also the knowledge around those things that you can't just go around the woods and say that plant's edible, that plant, well, what part of the plant is edible, what time of the year do you harvest it, how do you make sure that those plants are able to regenerate themselves year after year? There's lots of things that go with it. And
Right.
then once you start to learn those things and become reconnected to those knowledge systems, then you're really able to see all the abundance of gifts that the land is sharing. Whether it's walking down the street in Ohio and seeing like sumac growing and knowing how to taste that sumac for the perfect tartness and harvest it and then make like a tea out of it, but it's really tart, and so it's called sumac lemonade because it has that lemony flavor, right? And to
Whoa.
be able to do that, and it's like sweet. Also, sumac is a spice. You can grind it down and season food with it, right? But and it grows all over the
Yeah.
place,
Wait, are we
right?
talking about like poison sumac?
Not poison sumac. I'm talking
Okay.
about the red ones, not the
Oh,
white ones.
okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was like,
Yes. But you'll see them driving along the interstate, like the Ohio Turnpike or whatever it is. Like
yeah.
you'll just see sumac growing all around, or
Wow.
cedars or juniper. Actually, almost any conifer plant you can make a delicious tea from, and
Okay.
it's super high in vitamin C. Like it is delicious and has this like piney, citrusy flavor. You can sweeten it with maple syrup.
Yeah.
Like there's just things that are growing, and when you learn what they are, it's like great. Not only do I have a delicious drink, or I'll put cedar leaves like straight into a wait, like if I'm cooking like a pot roast or something or braising meat, you can put that right into the braising liquid and that flavor infuses into it,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Delicious. You have a
Yeah.
great thing there. But also, like, bro, you're never gonna get scurvy, you know? Or just like, yo, I don't need to buy emergency anymore. I have the world's best dose of vitamin C and it's growing in my front lawn. It's my friendly spruce tree here, or whatever it may be, right?
Wow.
And those things are right there. And when you start to do that, one, you recognize, hey, the world is giving me all these gifts. This is beautiful. And then you think of how you can give gifts back, whether it's taking care of those places, whether it's an offering of tobacco, whether it's pulling noxious weeds from around your favorite berry picking spot, whether it's
Hmm.
pouring the rest of your water bottle onto the tree that you picked some cedar from. There are ways that you can give back to those places as well. And I think that people get so caught up in this whole like humans are the virus thing, right?
Hmm.
And they're ignoring indigenous ecological caretaking that has taken place for thousands of years and has nurtured and cultivated biodiversity in those places. And I think that when we recognize ourselves as part of the system, not only do we get to enjoy the abundance of gifts of the landscape, but we
Right.
also feel more connected to the places that we're on. We don't feel like we're hurting. We feel like we can actually help and contribute to those places too. That was a heck of a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. Here's the
Not
thing.
the question. I don't know what the question was.
The tangent, you're perfectly fine. The tangent was incredible. I think where I'm coming from now is what question do I lead off with next? Because that tangent spawned like all of these. I'm like, I need to know this. I need to know this. I need to wait a minute. We're only talking for about an hour. There's no way I'm going to fit all of this in. And so I know we'll get to it like at the end of, where can people follow you and where can people, find your stuff, but you have such a rich knowledge about this. And when I look at our education system and how much it has failed, not only just every single child, but especially indigenous cultures, I'm I myself am looking for those resources to supplement my learning. And because you have that wealth of knowledge, I'll ask you at the end as well, but like, where can people go to learn this stuff? Because this is information that's like, I'm like, I have a conifer tree in my backyard and I had no idea that I could do these things with. I'm I'm not gonna say I hate tea. I'm trying to come around on tea. It's a weird flavor thing. I'm trying to get over it. But like I had no idea that I could do that. Like I didn't know that that offered anything to me. Like there's so many empty holes in my knowledge with food, and it for me being an indigenous person, being Nomana, like it's embarrassing to me. I'm like, how do I not know this? Like, so where can people go to learn?
I would say, first of all, never be embarrassed about not knowing the things, right? Because, as I said, that was knowledge that was very intentionally taken from us. I don't like
Yeah.
using the term, oh, this knowledge was lost. Like, it wasn't lost. Like, people literally, like, there's writings where they literally talked about how they can eradicate this knowledge. They put kids in boarding school so that they
Yes.
wouldn't learn all of these things. Like, there's a lot of work that was done so that you would feel disconnected from the landscape, because that's where there are so many resources for us, and there's so many tools and plentiful things, and colonial powers don't want us to have that.
No.
So you don't have to drink hot tea, by the way. You can make that tea,
See,
throw that in the fridge, sweeten it with some maple syrup, and then like you got
that's what
yourself a
gets
pretty
me the
thing that,
most.
I'm telling you.
Uh, Hot tea is actually the thing that I can stand the most.
Oh, okay. There you
Like
go.
like sweet tea
Yeah.
is rough for me. I
Okay.
don't know what
Then
it is,
don't
but
make it sweet.
so okay.
Are
And
the needles pokey? Like if
yes.
you poke, okay, that's probably a spruce
Okay.
or a pine. Do they grow in bunches, or are they just pokey, like all over evenly?
They grow in bunches.
Okay, might be a pine then.
Okay.
But yeah, you can make a tea with that real easy. It's gonna
So
be delicious.
is it just like getting putting them in like a cloth bag and steeping that in the water?
You don't have to put in a cloth bag.
I'm trying to think of what's like a
I
breathable.
would say you don't have to get a breathable thing. You can literally just put a big pot of water on your stovetop, throw some
Just
rinsed
throw them
needles in
in.
there, harvest above waist high, because I know you have a dog.
Yep.
Um, Rinse those needles off, and then just let them simmer on the stovetop for like 30 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
Even if you hate the flavor, it's gonna make your house smell great.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
perfect.
Not the point. What I would say is, wherever you live, I would find a plant identification book for that area.
Okay.
Start to learn some of the local plants. I
Yeah.
think that's a really good resource that anyone can do, even in urban areas. Um, and I mean, I use Google Lens on my phone as my plant ID app,
Okay.
because it will basically, you can go and search pictures of plants, or take pictures, and then basically it does a Google image search, and then it will find the plant that matches it.
Okay.
So I was in Tahlequah, Oklahoma the other day, and my friend, I was with my friend, and he stepped outside to go smoke a joint. So I was like, fine, let's go outside, right? And so we're outside, and I was like, what kind of tree is that? He's from there, right? And I'm
Yeah.
sitting there, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, I got to do a plant ID because I'm freaking cold, right? And so I'm sitting there, there's all these big trees, and this tree has big weird bark, and so I'm using Google Lens, and I'm trying to ID this plant, so I'm like finding what leaves I can that still remain on the branches. um, and it was a sugarberry. Eventually we figured out it was a sugarberry
Wow.
plant, so which I think is a type of hackberry. But anyway, it was an adventure because I just wanted to know what the plant was.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one place to get started. I would also say that another place is to join local or regional foraging groups
Hmm.
on Facebook.
Okay.
If you have Facebook, I would join there, because the advantage of that is plant ID books are almost always going to show you the pictures of the plants or the fungi or whatever it is that you're getting
Hmm.
when they are like blooming, right? And
Okay.
so when you harvest them is not always when they're flowering.
Right.
You want to see what they look like when you harvest them. You want to see what they look like at the time of the year that you're in right now, because that's what you want to know. And so the advantage of joining harvesting groups or foraging groups is that other people are going to be putting up pictures, and they're either going to be like, oh my gosh, I just found these wild onions. This is so exciting. That tells you one or two things. One, that wild onions are currently in season around you.
Mm-hmm.
And two, this is a picture of what a wild onion looks like right now in
Yeah.
my area.
Okay.
And that's really helpful. And then the third thing is, follow like some state parks, or, if you're in foraging groups or something, people are almost always like posting like meetups, or we're going to
Yeah.
go on a plant walk in this state park, or this museum's doing some type of like local botany thing, or, anything like that are great places for you to get together with other people. And there's no better way to learn than just being out in those
Just
spaces.
being there.
Yeah. And that, I mean, for people that are lucky enough to be around Indigenous communities that are doing things like that, that's awesome. But I know that a lot of folks don't necessarily have access to those immediate resources. I love following Linda Black Elk's work that she does out of North Dakota, and she's doing amazing work. But I'm always like, the choke cherries aren't in season yet here in Montana, or like we don't have like this plant, and I'm bummed, or something. Like we don't have the wild plums that she has, and so I get to see a lot of things, but I'm rarely like right there to kind of get that hands-on experience. But there was a state park in Montana that was doing a wild foods walk with one of their rangers, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna go to that. I'm just gonna go and like check it out and see what we can do. And so we got to walk around, and we got to munch some fireweed leaves and identify some things that I didn't know about, like false Solomon seal, and
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, some of the things about like bitter root and different things like that. So
Yeah.
anything you learn, it's good knowledge. It's always good to have. And I would also say that if you're a person that knows how to identify one berry ever, great, share that knowledge. Tell other people about your berry, right? Don't be embarrassed that you only know one berry,
Yeah.
right? You're like, I know that that's a raspberry plant. Cool. That's awesome.
It
You tell
contributes to the
everybody about that raspberry
collective.
plant. What's that?
It like contributes to the collective. Like when
It
everybody's
does. It
sharing,
does.
it helps.
Yeah. And
So,
if you're like, you know, I can tell everyone on this right now that North America has 0 poisonous compound berries. So if it looks like a raspberry or a blackberry or a thimbleberry or a salmonberry, which you guys may know or not know depending on where you're at,
nope.
they're compound berries. They have all the little tiny berries all
Oh,
making
okay.
one big, like a raspberry,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So if it looks like that, if it has that shape, it's edible.
Just
Like
no
you
matter
never,
what. Like if
like
that's what it looks
in
like, it's
North
edible.
America, there's no poisonous compound berries, so you're safe to eat it. So I can tell you that.
Wow.
If that's a helpful pro tip.
So here's where I want to shift now. Man, so much. So why is it then? You have this wealth of knowledge, and there are so many places to find it. Why is it then when people think of indigenous foods, like all they think of is like fry bread? Like that's like the one thing that people know, and they don't know anything else.
Um, I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is that fry bread is the one food that we really created from rations. It's from
Right.
this period of time, of course, that almost all Native nations were forced into a ration dependent system.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, you get these big bags of flavorless dust, right? It's wheat flour, except it would often come contaminated with mold or worms or really gross nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And so the way to cook with that was, of course, heating it in hot oil, because it could reach a temperature that would help destroy some of that grossness, make
Mm-hmm.
it a little bit more food safe and more palatable. And so that's why you end up with kind of this pan indigenous food.
Yeah.
And I always say fry bread is not indigenous, but it is a traditional food
Yeah.
in that it's part of our history.
Right.
It helped us survive a period of time that would have otherwise meant starvation.
Yeah.
And fry bread is part of our story of resilience. And it's a story of resilience that almost all Native people have in common,
Yeah.
which means that no matter where you're at, fry bread is part of that story. Whereas things like corn, beans, squash, not so much universal, even though they were very, very widely grown. The Three Sisters polyculture was planted from the northeast to the southeast to the southwest down into Mexico and then even into South America, right? And then wild rice, of course, chiles, like 2/3 of the world's food originated in the Americas, right?
Right.
Tomatoes came from Central and Southeastern, or Central America, Southeastern United States. Chiles, of course, peanuts, wild rice, of course, corn, beans, and squash, potatoes from South America, all these foods that are grown and have been incorporated into cultural cuisine around the world originated with indigenous knowledge here in the Americas. But because those foods were intentionally taken away from us and we were forced to learn all of these other ways of cooking and eating, and that whole assimilation process that kids had to go through for boarding school also included forced lessons in agriculture, as in monoculture tillage agriculture. That was the goal, was to turn Native people into farmers.
Interesting. Okay.
But not farmers in our community farming sense,
Right.
farmers in romanticized family farm sense. And that's how we would become civilized, quote unquote, right?
Right.
And so those were also lessons, it wasn't just that our foods were taken away, it was that we were very intentionally taught to do other things, right? And now we have a lot of Native cowboys because we were taught to raise cows after our bison were taken away.
Right.
And so, it's, as I said, it's not through an accident that has become fry bread has become associated with Native food.
It's like the Native food.
Yeah, just like rodeo Indians, right? Like, that's not an accident. But I always say, like, that's not something we can blame Native people for. It's just we recognize that work was very intentional, and so our work to restore that knowledge has to be intentional too. It's not just going to come back. We have to really work and seek it out, and also use the tools that we have access to. For example, live streaming, video content tools like Instagram Reels, whatever that may be. There are ways that we can connect with ancestral knowledge, connect with place, but also do that as modern people in the 21st century.
Yeah. So then shifting into modern, when we look at, we would talk about how, fry bread is the one thing that a lot of people know. Looking into modern Native cooking, like what kind of impact do we have now? Like I think of a few restaurants that I know off the top of my head, like Tokabe in Colorado has become really big. And I know that there's a fry bread, it's either a food truck or just like a straight up like restaurant in like Seattle that's become pretty big up there. And so in a few places, you're starting to see some of these modern Native restaurants popping up. I mean, we're still very much the small, like least represented when it comes to the industry as far as like restaurants go. But like, what role do you see that having now as we're trying to make a footprint?
Shoot, in the last 2 years, I mean, Owamini, which is Sean Sherman's new restaurant in Minneapolis, just won the James Beard Award for Best New Restaurant in the United States. That's an all indigenous food restaurant. Yeah. And then Wapepa's Kitchen, which is run by Krista Wapepa in the Bay Area. She just made it a year with her new restaurant. You can also
Whoa.
You can also order her. She has like it's like a cherry chocolate wild rice bar. There's like a thing that she'll ship to you if you can't go to her restaurant. There's like a cool bar that you can order from Wapepa's Kitchen. And then Gordon Ramsay had his competition show Next Level Chef, which was won by Chef Piet, who is a Native woman, right? I think I want to say Potawatomi, but I might be wrong there.
She did a pop-up shop in LA.
Yeah, she has a pop-up shop in LA, so she'll set up pop-up dinners. And then, not so much an indigenous restaurant, but Hulu just came out with a series, which is Chefs versus Wild, where they turn out chefs and they go and forage out in like the Pacific Northwest, and
Hmm.
then they go back and they have to cook like a big fancy meal. And regularly it features native chefs, and the judge is Valerie Seacrest, who's a native foodie and
What
nutritionist
what's it
and
called again?
forager. Next, no, Chefs versus Wild.
Chefs versus
It's on
Wild.
Hulu. Like this is just a thing that's happening. Like
Yeah.
native food world is exploding. And that's not to mention like all of the cookbooks that have been coming out even within the last 2 years alone, with different indigenous chefs talking different foods from all over.
Right.
And then you get folks that are doing work like Dave McCluskey and the Corn Mafia, and folks that are doing work. I know even like I'm in Boston right now. There's a wonderful Peruvian chef here that does pop-ups with traditional indigenous foods from Peru. Like there's lots and lots of cool things happening all over, and like I can't even talk about all of them because
Right.
it's there's so many amazing things happening. So
So
that's really inspiring to see.
what do we need to do then? Because I not to make it negative, because this is a very positive thing, and my notes I'm just filling them up because I'm gonna look up all these restaurants. Um, so it makes me think of like the conversation that I had with Witchy Twitchy in the first one, where we talked about how like there's a lot of different native and indigenous like shows and movies and stuff that are starting to come out, like obviously Res Dogs and Rutherford Falls, Spirit Rangers. Like we're starting to see more, and then in talking to Frank, like we're starting to see more representation in music, and now you're saying like there's more stuff happening in the culinary world. But then like if I just do like just a regular look out into the world, it still seems so small. So, and I asked Frank the same question, and so I don't expect you to know the world saving answer. What do we have to do to make this mainstream? You know what I mean? Like I within our communities, like we know this stuff and we know that it's big and it's important, and it's our culture that is firing it up and amplifying the voices. But what do we need to do to make this mainstream?
Yeah. Um, I think that a lot of the work that's being done right now is pushing things into the mainstream. I mean, the fact that like Awamni won the James Beard Award for best new restaurant, right? That's
Right.
that's not best new ethnic restaurant. It's not.
True. True.
But I just laughed at because I think Sean got up on that stage, and I didn't watch his award speech, but I think he basically got up on the James Beard stage and said, "This is bullshit that it's taken this long for
It
Native
is.
people." So I was like, "I appreciate you,"
Ah,
but so that's happening, right? Res Dogs is winning awards for the amazing work that it's doing to bring a story that is real,
yeah.
without being like a, a Diane Sawyer poverty porn documentary or something.
Yeah.
Sorry, we all have trauma from that whole episode.
Yeah.
But there are lots of cool things happening, and there's lots of uplifting stories. So I think it's happening. And in the meantime, I think just for Native folks, like we're celebrating this like unapologetic commitment to our stories being told in a way where sometimes non-native people won't understand it.
Hmm.
It's okay that it's not mainstream all the time. I think that in some cases it's like, no, I love being able to celebrate like all of this. My cousin Lily Gladstone was on an episode of Reservation Dogs, and I don't know if you've seen season 2 yet.
No.
But there's an episode that takes place in a prison, and she's on that episode. And I know when it
That's
came
cool.
out, a lot of Indian country was just bawling at this
Yeah.
episode because it was so real. And it's a scene that I don't know if non-native people could relate to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's our stories, and I'm just appreciative that we're in a place where we're able to tell our stories.
Yeah.
and not have to try to make things mainstream. I think there's so many Native folks doing the work and in production and filmmaking and writing and all of this, that folks are mainstream folks that do have that power to put us on Hulu or Peacock or whatever it may be, are saying, all right, yes, you guys can make your own stories and we'll produce that. We'll
Yeah.
go with it. And that's really cool to see in and of itself.
It is. It's so cool. I selfishly, I think about like the life that my kids are gonna have, and like my son and daughter are never gonna have the childhood that I had, where it was myself and my family, and then just no offense to my friends and loved ones if you ever watch this, but just like in a sea of white. Like there was no other natives around me. And so like that mainstream was all that I had.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing else out there besides like at home, and nobody understood those stories. So like even now, with everything that is out there, with all of the songs or the music and the shows and the restaurants, like everything that's starting to blow up, like my kids are never gonna have like that growing up that I did, where it's like nobody else is like me kind of deal. So
Yeah. Shoot,
it's
I was born in 1993, right? We celebrated Pocahontas when it came out
yes,
because it was
oh
finally the first time that like I was like, oh, somebody that like looks like me, right? And I was like, and we can all look back at that and be like, yeah, that was pretty messed up. But like at the same
yeah,
time, I was like, these are voiced by Native people.
yeah,
And like it was the first time that we really got to like see ourselves
yeah,
on TV. And so that's the jacked up representation that we came from.
right.
And that at the time was celebration for us. And so now I'm looking back and I'm like, you know,
Have you rewatched it recently?
I haven't rewatched it recently.
Oof. I was just curious. Because
It's, I mean, there,
it's rough.
I
It's rough.
probably know it like word for word though. That's the bad part of it. I haven't watched it in 10 years, but I probably still know it word for
Yeah.
word.
And
Ugh.
I remember when it came out, we had comforters and the little kids couch and pillowcases and curtains. Like Pocahontas was everywhere. And then I
Yeah.
rewatched the movie and I was like, oh my gosh, why did we give them the money for this? This is so bad.
Yeah.
But it was all we had. It was all we had.
And at least, I mean, it wasn't by any means like yay colonizers, because they
No,
definitely
no.
did like a whole like, but but yes, it wasn't great. It was
Yeah.
not great. But it's
Second
all we
one
had.
was
It's
yeah.
all we freaking had.
Seriously. Um so I know we talked about a lot of stuff that's in here. I want to talk about and this is hard because I don't want it to be like dissing to anybody who is doing their own thing with native cuisine, but if you are to recommend, and maybe this is like something for the chat or comments in the YouTube video, if you have questions, put them in there. Or if you have like a specific location of like, hey, I want to know for this city or this state what I should look for. But so with restaurants, if we're looking for authentic cuisine, because oftentimes, as you have pointed out, and I say all the time, like our food, our culture gets co-opted, and it's really important for me for people to have options to try authentic native cuisine. Do you have any recommendations? Like I know we've already talked about a couple of places, but like
Yeah.
what are some other places to really get some of that authentic cuisine? So then cuz so like for example, I two of my white friends they were visiting and I was like, "Hey, we're going to go try the food truck so you can try something." And they were like, "I," and you know, they're in their mid 20s. They're like, "I never would have had this if you hadn't have brought me here." So that kind of like people have never had this, where should they go?
Yeah. So I would say a couple of other places that come to mind are Tanya Brandt's place, and I can't remember the name of it, but she's in Brantford, Ontario.
Okay.
And so um, She regularly does different specials, and that is Mohawk cuisine. So she has a place that specializes in different Haudenosaunee foods. And then there's actually another place because Owamni is now impossible to get into. So they have a food truck, which I think is Tonka Truck. So sometimes they'll pull that out for street fairs and stuff like that. But
Okay.
Gatherings Cafe is also in the Twin Cities area.
Okay.
And that's run by Chef Brian Yazzie. So that is an option. Um, there is there's a food truck. This is a very obscure thing, and I only happen to know about this because it's in Montana. There's a food truck that typically operates in Great Falls, Montana. It's called Oki Eats, which is Oki is our Blackfeet word for hello.
Uh-huh.
But it's actually a Korean Blackfeet fusion food truck.
Whoa. Okay.
So if you're like, yes, I want bibimbap, but make it bison, then that's where you want to go.
Wow.
Which, as I said, that is a particular thing. Uh, I think there might be a food truck in Spokane, Washington, but it's mostly fry bread,
Okay.
I think. And then there's a couple different places in the Southwest, but I can't remember any of their names specifically. So if you guys are like, if someone's watching this and they're like, I'm in the Southwest, tell me, then shoot me a message on a social media platform or my email or something, and I will find it for you. And I will find the cities because I know there's a couple different places in Arizona and New Mexico as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're in New Mexico, like in like the Albuquerque area, I know that the Pueblo Museum down in Albuquerque has a phenomenal restaurant in there that has a plethora of indigenous foods. I straight up jacked one of their paper menus when I was there. Because I was like, this is the most beautiful menu and
Yeah.
full of wonderful ideas. So there's lots of cool things. And then, you know, I'm also really lucky that there's a lot of non-indigenous caterers that are interested in preparing native foods for different events and for showcasing local flavors and by
Okay.
procuring those ingredients from native producers. So I'm working with the Virgin Hotels staff in Las Vegas to feed 1,000 people for a luncheon in the first week of December, right? And so
Wow.
we're doing choke cherry vinaigrettes, and we're doing walleye from Red Lake, and we're doing some strip steaks and some blue corn polenta and some seasonal vegetables, and then we're doing tepary beans from the autumn down, like the Tohono autumn, down on the border, and we're blending the tepary beans into oblivion, mixing them with maple syrup, and we're baking a cake with some Passamaquoddy blueberries,
Oh.
a little wild blueberry swirl with some Red Lake syrup. Like we're doing a whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't actually have to do it. I just have to make the menu and order the thing. But we're gonna feed 1,000 people at this
Yeah.
big luncheon for the Intertribal
That's so
Agricultural
cool.
Council conference. So you know, there are things that are happening, and there are folks that are interested in buying from native producers and supplying native things. You know, the folks that that run concessions in Yellowstone have reached out to me to ask where they can buy more native ingredients, how they can build some more menus that feature native foods. Like there's a lot of really cool things that are happening, and the number of things I'll be able to list off in the next year is going to be even bigger.
Yeah.
And it's going to be awesome. So
Awesome. Well,
you know,
so
it's
you just cemented that we're gonna have to have this conversation again next year.
yes,
Yeah.
we'll update. Maybe
yeah.
I'll have my children's cookbook done by then.
Please. First
I'm
pre-order.
working on it. It's once my busy season, once Native American Heritage Month is done and I can
Yeah.
hibernate for winter, I can work on the cookbook because everyone keeps asking me, and I think that kids' cookbook space still really needs to be filled.
Yes. Yes, it does. So inversely, so we've got a list of places to check out. What are places to avoid? Like what are maybe like some restaurants or places that either exploit Native Americans or maybe they culture appropriate. So like for example, I've pretty much boycotted Crumble Cookie because Crumble Cookie did a fry bread cookie. I emailed them. I like messaged them. I was like, "Hey, this is a big indigenous thing. It comes from a place of oppression." I didn't see any mention about indigenous cultures because like they'll do partnerships with like Oreo and Slurpee and all these places, and they'll be like,
Yeah.
"Hey," and put the branding up. And I'm like, "But you can't say anything about Native people when you're doing this."
Yeah.
Um, and so they were radio silent. So I was like, "Okay, fine. I'm telling people stay away from crumble." So like
I don't
what
know what crumble cookie is, but maybe I'll start a Twitter war with them too.
uh do it. They apparently they don't say anything. So but yeah,
Yeah.
what are some places to avoid?
Before we say that, I'm going to add the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian to the list of restaurants that people should check out.
Done.
Because they have a good native food restaurant in there as well. As for places to avoid, I don't have any specifics, but I would say that if there are places that are trying to reference native food, I would ask either who the chef is,
Mm,
or are they buying from natives, or are their profits supporting natives in any way?
yeah.
And there's a lot of, obviously, 2/3 of the world's food originated in the Americas, right? Like lots of
Right.
people are making food with indigenous ingredients.
Right.
But if they're specifically trying to identify things as being somehow indigenous or connected to native cuisine or something like that, there have definitely been some non-native chefs that have tried to profit off of indigenous culinary knowledge.
Hmm.
um, and that always gives me squicky feelings. I can't remember anyone specifically. I know I mentioned Chef Brian Yazzie earlier. He's called out a few people for doing that kind of stuff. Um, there's quite a few folks that are have tried to do that,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work out. But there's also ways that people can recognize that knowledge and still be very much in that space, and honor where the knowledge came from. And I think like that's what Chefs versus Wild is doing by literally bringing Valerie Segrest on to judge everybody.
Yeah.
And great, she is that person that holds a lot of that indigenous food knowledge from that area. So I love seeing that she's the one that gets to judge everybody. So there's ways to do it, but I would have some heads up for a couple things. And again, if someone has any specific questions, they can always reach out to me too.
Yeah.
But again, like I've never heard of crumble cookie before because I'm from Montana and I don't know what that is.
That's it. That it's okay. Now you know. Screw them if you ever see them.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some questions for you. Some questions
Okay.
coming in. First one. So you make a lot of food yourself, obviously. What are some of your top recipes? You're like, you know what? I make this. It freaking rules. Like, or like, what are some of the favorite things that you make that you find that you maybe make a lot?
Did I freeze for a second or am I okay?
You're
Okay.
there. You go.
I plugged my computer in and now it's being bad.
It has more power, so it's like I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, its processing is all over the place now. Hold
We
on.
can still hear you, okay, if that helps.
Okay. Let me see if this works. Okay. I turned my camera off and then back on again,
And it
we're better.
seems good. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, one of the things I love making because it's super simple and the ultimate comfort food is bison and butternut squash lasagna.
Mm.
I literally have a tattoo of a butternut squash on my arm now, so I didn't realize that when I went to scratch my head. But it's basically cutting the butternut squash into lasagna noodles and then making like a nice meat sauce and just layering it and baking it till the squash is soft. Super, super easy. You could put mozzarella on it if you're not lactose intolerant and if you're okay bending the rules when it comes to indigenous foods. Obviously, we didn't have cheese traditionally.
Yeah.
So that's a really easy one. There's also a super simple way to combine maple syrup and sunflower butter or peanut butter, if that's your thing. Both are indigenous. And basically make a caramel. And then you could air pop popcorn or use a bag of microwave popcorn. And then put that in like a big paper bag, drizzle your caramel over the top of it, shake it, and you have yourself some delicious proteiny caramel popcorn.
Oh, okay.
uh, Super fast, and it's like a super cool activity to do with kids. I mean, obviously hot caramel, beware, but you put that in a bag and then you just let them shake the heck out of it, and then they have a great snack. Also, if you use sunflower seed butter, that's totally fine for them to bring to school too.
Yeah.
It's like a good sweet treat. So basically you're utilizing that temperature at which sugar crystallizes to help harden that caramel.
Yeah.
So you heat it up on the stovetop. That's super easy. I also, someone wrote a comment on my YouTube today and they're like, I love this recipe, but also I'm obsessed with your sunflower butter popcorn or something. So, I was like, "Aw." So that made me think of that. Um, and then yeah, I mean, there's a couple other things. One of the other things that people really seem to like is using blue cornmeal as a kind of a batter for any type of fish that you're pan frying.
Hmm.
You don't even have to like dip it in egg or anything. You just press some blue cornmeal, and I normally season it with like some chili powder and some salt, maybe a little bit of paprika. Paprika is just dried up bell peppers that have been ground up, so
Hmm.
also indigenous. Um, but it's really easy just to kind of make a little seasoning and then bread that into trout or whitefish or cod, whatever you're going to pan fry, and then pan fry it. And then you have that little bit of breading, but it's a blue cornmeal breading. So
Nice.
super
Okay.
good. And then you can buy from native suppliers for your blue cornmeal too, if you wanted to support native folks doing that work.
Always.
And then my favorite thing, because it's harvest season, is cooking wild rice in bone broth and apple juice instead of water. And then obviously that pumps it full of nutrients, makes it
Yeah.
slightly sweet. I cook dried cranberries in that wild rice too,
Hmm.
and they kind of rehydrate as they're cooking with the wild rice. So they plump back up again. Um, and then I will add some chopped toasted pecans and some peeled diced apple, like green apple.
Yeah.
And it makes a super delicious, like wild rice pilaf. And it's pretty much just perfect for uh, bringing to potlucks and harvest celebrations and all sorts of things that people are having this week. So
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
all those recipes are on my website. So
Perfect. And
easy.
in a little bit, we'll tell you folks where to find it. Next question for you from Super What One. They're asking, what are some of your favorite indigenous spices or herbs?
So spices and herbs. Obviously, I mentioned sumac before, which
Mm-hmm.
has that slightly tart flavor. I love using juniper berries, which are kind of peppery. So sometimes you can even buy juniper berries online, but junipers grow almost everywhere, so that's pretty easy to find juniper berries. Um, Yarrow is native to the whole northern hemisphere. It's actually its scientific name is Achillea millefolium. It comes from um, blood clotting properties. So Achilles used to take it with him into battle, chew it
Hmm.
up, and then you put it on a wound. It stops the bleeding. Blackfeet warriors used to do the same thing,
Whoa. Okay.
but it has a flavor profile kind of like tarragon. So
Mm.
I've made like a yarrow aioli before. It's a great thing to grow on in a pot on your back deck. You can normally find it at a garden store. Grows wild all over back home. Bee balm is another plant that a lot of people grow in their local garden store, sometimes called wild bergamot, sometimes called
Oh.
horsemint,
Okay.
monarda. It goes by a lot of different names. It kind of has a flavor profile like oregano.
Hmm.
So I'll mix it in like pizza crusts and pasta sauces and things like that. That's a nice spice to be able to use. Mint is obviously super popular as a spice or a tea. Obviously, you could use sumac, bee balm, yarrow, all as teas as
Mm-hmm.
well, if you don't hate them. Um, Mint is a great tea, but also mint like is one of the OG medicines because Blackfeet people used to take mint, mix it with like bison tallow, like that fat, that animal fat,
Yeah.
and then use that as a like a muscle rub or a respiratory rub because it's just mint and fat, which is basically Vicks Vapor Rub or Icy Hot, right?
Yeah.
Like Blackfeet invented this. At least that's what I'm going to go with. So that, in addition to just being a spice, which can be used, I mean, you can make your own mint ice cream, right? With
Yeah.
like coconut milk or and maple syrup. Like there you go. Maple can, of course, be considered a spice in certain cases. It has a very particular flavor. And different berries have been used as spices as well. And then, of course, chiles, like all the chiles, which we call peppers because Columbus thought when he was looking for spices that the first spicy thing he tasted was a pepper, like black peppercorn.
Yeah.
Not the same thing. Columbus was confused. So.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right.
that's what I got. That's what I
Awesome.
got for you.
Well, then, rounding things off, where can people find you? So, social media, your website, let people know where they can support you and get some of those recipes.
Yeah, so I'm all over social media at IndigiKitchen, of course, at indigikitchen.com, where you'll find lots of recipes. I am the most untalkative food blogger ever, and I don't have any ads on my website, so it's very boring. But I'm at YouTube, Facebook, Instagram at IndigiKitchen. So really easy to find me there. If you make recipes, I love being tagged in people's stories and seeing what people are doing because it's super exciting when I know people are using the information that I'm putting out there.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate you taking this time in a very busy month, a very busy time to sit and to talk with me. Is there anything else, if you have like one nugget of wisdom to share as we're signing off, what do you have for people?
Here's my nugget of wisdom. Regenerative agriculture is not new. It's new with a K, as in it is things that we have known and practiced and used sustainably for thousands of years. So we can feed ourselves, we can feed the planet, and we can find connection on the landscape once again.
Awesome. Thank you again. Thank you everybody for watching live on Twitch. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you again for supporting. We'll see you for the next conversation. But until then, don't forget you're on native land and be well. Take care.